All right.
Ready or not, here we go. Well, welcome to Let Me Introduce You. This is one of a whole number of projects that Big Bear Connected does. And obviously the whole purpose of this is try to bring people together in this time and have them a chance to talk to each other and do entertain. And there's all kinds of things that are going on, so it's really fun. As Tori said, you're all muted and you will stay muted until we get done, and then we'll open it up and you'll have a chance to ask questions or make comments. And you're all wondering if I lost my mind with this hat on. The first one, the only concern was the glare off of my bald head. So I decided the answer was to put on a hat. And I looked through my hat collection, and obviously with the weather the way it is, it seemed like this was most appropriate. So that's the explanation for the weird hat. I'm really excited, and let me introduce you to Barbara Jordan. What a great treat it is to have you with us, Barbara. We're going to have a lot of fun today, and she has an amazing story. And although we advertise this as primarily her amazing photography, we're going to start in a little bit different place because she really has a fascinating background in a whole nother area. And you're probably wondering now, how in the heck do these two things connect? Well, after a bit, you're going to understand how these two things connect. So Barbara, welcome. Thanks for doing this. Glad you could be here.
Thank you for having me.
A few years, and why don't we start, Barbara? Let's go back and talk about your family and your experience in school, say through high school. Can we start there and have you talk a little bit about that,
well,
please?
I grew up in Long Beach, California, not far from here. Spent a lot of time on the beach. I was the oldest of three girls, and we're all five, no brothers. So I kind of became my father's son, so to speak. He was an outdoors person. He hiked, he camped, he fished, he photographed wildlife, and just wanted to be outdoors all the time. And he drugged me with him everywhere he went. So I did really grow up in the outdoors. And I went to Millikan High School in Long Beach. And after high school, I got married young to my high school sweetheart. And we were married for 16 years and lived in Long Beach until 1966, and then moved to Redlands. And we were together for 16 years, raising our family. And after that, I went back to school at Crafton Hills. So that's how I got up in this area.
So Barbara,
after my divorce.
You had how many children?
I have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls.
And what are they doing now?
The oldest runs a huge construction company that builds freeways. That's my oldest son. My next son is a CPA, and my oldest daughter's a ranger, and my youngest daughter is an attorney and a school teacher.
Wow, interesting. Your high school years, were they eventful in any particular way at Millikan? That's a big school, yes?
Yeah, I was class into Millikan. They went all the way through. And yeah, it was, well, high school was eventful for me. I was on the Pacific Coast Club swim, and I did gymnastics, and was very active in sports in high school. And it was Long Beach is a big, so it was a big school, and it was fun being the first class to go through.
Were you the homecoming queen or the prom queen at Millikan?
No, I was a real nerd. I wanted to grow up and be a physicist, and I was just really, really studied all the time. Football games.
So you moved to Redlands, and tell us this Crafton Hills.
Yes.
What were you going to do at Crafton?
Well, my husband and I, as I said, divorced after 16 years, and I thought I should go back to school. So I headed up to Crafton and started taking classes there. And while I was there, I met some attorneys who were teaching up there. And after a while, one of them offered me a job in the legal field in San Bernardino. And so that's my first intro into law, was through my classes at Crafton Hills.
Were you thinking about becoming an attorney or a
No. I was thinking about how to support 4 kids And I had a husband who was contributing, so that wasn't an issue. But I looked and it seemed like accounting jobs were the best paying jobs then. And so I was studying accounting while I was at Crafton Hills. So no intention of going into law at the time.
And so tell us this transition into this mitigation thing. How did that happen, or where'd that come from?
Okay. Well, I went to work in San Bernardino for some criminal defense attorneys in 1977. And at that time, the state of California had just reinstated the death penalty law. They had a law in 77, which was again reversed. And in 78, the law we're currently under came in. All of the attorneys I was working with were working on death penalty cases. And I worked on my first death penalty case in 1978. And the attorney I was working for told me I had to read the annotated codes, which is what law is. We go by the codes. And I read all the criminal codes, including all the codes on capital punishment, and became fascinated by it, actually. And the reason I became fascinated was I grew up in just an average family. My dad was a painting contractor. My mother was a homemaker. When I went into the legal field, I realized that there were lots of people in the world that weren't raised in normal families. They were raised in just horrible situations, and situations that were bad enough to allow them to become the kind of person that might commit a murder. And that fascinated me. The whole area of law fascinated me. And I started studying and going to continuing education at the bar and learning everything I could learn about death penalty law.
So explain this. Explain this whole process and where this mitigation comes into play and where you became an expert.
When you have a capital case in the state of California, there's basically two trials. The first trial is to determine whether or not you're guilty of the crime for which you're charged, and whether or not a special circumstance is found true that allows it to move you on to the second phase of the trial, which is the penalty phase. And the penalty phase of a trial, a totally separate trial, same jury, but different trial. And there's lots of laws that apply to the penalty phase of the trial, and that involves things that we call aggravation and mitigation. Aggravation is how heinous the crime is. Does the person that was convicted have prior convictions? Did he commit lots of bad acts in his past? All these kinds of things, mitigating factors. Mitigating factors are factors that could be like in his childhood, he was sodomized or raped, or they were brutalized and beaten, or just things that were unimaginable to me that happened to young kids. And what happens is that in the penalty phase is a jury is allowed to consider anything that's mitigating as well as all the aggravating things. And one mitigating factor can outweigh all the aggravating. And the reason all this is so important is, imagine if you're a juror in a capital case and your job is going to be to decide which of two possible punishments you're going to give to this defendant. Are you going to give him life in prison without possibility of parole? Or are you going to give him the death penalty? So my job as a mitigation expert was to go wherever I needed to go around the country. One trip was to Greece, to put together the social history of the defendant. It was almost like making a movie. I interviewed their kindergarten teacher. I interviewed anyone I could find that had ever had anything to do with the defendant, and tried to put together this whole social history of the defendant's life so the jury could be presented that, so they could make a reasoned decision on what penalty was appropriate. So,
You have a license? What are your qualifications? How did you end up doing this?
So when all this started in 78, there were only, when I started doing my mitigation work, there were 36 people on death row. That's it. So we knew everybody on death row, and we were reading all this case law, and it became apparent that a lot of attorneys that have done these first cases under the new law did not do what they should have done in order to investigate mitigation evidence, and they didn't present it to juries. And this is how a lot of these cases got reversed in the beginning. And so there was a real need for someone to specialize in putting together this social history and traveling all over doing this. And I did work with an investigator for a long time who helped me locate people so I could go interview them. But I would go into the homes and sit down and find out all I could and try and get these people to talk about the most horrible things that had happened in their life, how they were raised and everything. And that, the same with the defendant. A lot of defendants were trying to play hard guy and didn't want to talk about that they got so brutalized when they were young. And so there was a need for people who were really good at information from people, getting people to talk. And there was no such thing. So there was another one, Marty Erickson up north, and we started this, offering this to attorneys on these cases. And eventually it was like, well, how do you want the court to appoint you? Because all of you are paying for the work we do. This is all court appointed under a special funding that's confidential from the state of California. So you had to have a name. You had to be something. And so we decided we would call ourselves Mitigation Experts. And there were two of us, and we handled almost all the cases in the state of California, including those on post-conviction habeas cases. Now today, there isn't any death penalty case that goes to trial without a mitigation expert. It is on the expert appointment list of every superior court in the state. It's just considered an expert category now. And no, there's no license. You just have to have recommendations from other attorneys. It's a word of mouth thing almost. And you have to be able to prove to the court, the attorney does, that you should be appointed, that you have all these abilities in this area. And that's basically how that all came about. And I'm really excited now that it's common in the state of California. Every case has a mitigation expert. Lots of times that's a licensed psychologist that does it.
There's lots of reasons I wouldn't ever want to be an attorney, but one of them would be if I really felt like the person was guilty and I was asked to defend them. That would be troubling to me. Does that issue come up for you?
Not at all. Well, understand the work I do is all in the penalty phase. It has nothing to do with whether or not the client's guilty or innocent. Client's already found guilty. The work I did only had to do with what the appropriate punishment is. But in law and in criminal defense law, there has to be a balance always of power. You have to make sure the government follows the law. So, I mean, most of the clients we work with are guilty. It's to what degree are they guilty?
Sure.
That's the main thing. Usually a DA may charge first-degree murder when in fact the client's actually only guilty of maybe manslaughter. So all of it is making everybody follow all the rules. You have to have both sides. You can't just have one side.
So after 18 years of dealing with really life and death situations, that's got to wear on you a bit. Did that begin to wear you down? And
it's very depressing after a while. These defendants have some of the most depressing lives growing up that I knew existed. I didn't know people were raised like that. And so, yes, it eventually came time where we actually had an execution in the state of California. And there was Robert Harris. Somebody keeps messaging me. I can't go away. And I was at San Quentin the night Robert Harris was executed, and with his wife. And there were a lot of people there. And it was so traumatic to me because the execution was stopped, then started again, then stopped, then started again, and finally Robert Harris was executed. And I think it was the whole stopping and starting and the torturous situation that was going on that really impacted me. I mean, all this is a depressing field to be in anyway. And I was so stressed, so depressed over the whole thing, like the reality of it, I guess you'd say. And Robert Harris wasn't, I did not work with Robert Harris, but there were a lot of people up there. There were also victims' families up there. I mean, it was just execution. And I rented a motel room in Corte Madera, and I stayed there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days trying to think through, wanted to keep doing this because it was so traumatic. It was just really traumatic to me.
So it's time for a transition in your life. And that's where the photography came in. Tell us about that transition. Did you know anything about photography or cameras, or how'd that whole thing?
Nothing. I had a camera on automatic, that's it. That's all I had. I mean, when I was doing my mitigation workup, I went around and photographs were, I always had a camera with me taking pictures, but no, I knew nothing about photography, and I had not had any inclination to be a photographer. What I really did was examine where I was at in my life, what was important to me, what could I do if I didn't do my mitigation workup? And I thought about maybe the smart thing to do was think about what excited me when I was a child. What made me love life when I was a child? And what made me love life was being outdoors with my dad, camping, seeing all the beautiful scenery. And I thought, okay, I want a job that's going to keep me outdoors. And so I said, okay, I'll be a photographer. That's how that started. So no background, just that's what I'm gonna do to keep me outdoors.
So you got a brownie box camera and you want to become a more talented photographer. How do you do that?
Well, I did buy a Canon, a little more than a brownie. No, I had a Canon A1, an old manual camera. I'm Cece there. She probably knows what it is. And so I enrolled in classes from UC Santa Cruz, field, not classroom classes, field workshops through the UC system was where I first started. Well, there were some of the best photographers in the world teaching these classes through the UC system. And the first one I went to was up in Mono Lake. And they taught us all this about the zone system and all these dials on my camera and all that. I had no idea what any of them did. But the exciting thing about taking in the field workshops is you're out there with experts who are really good at what they do. And they're teaching you how to set your camera and do all this in certain scenes and all. And as a result, when you come home, you have some great photos and you didn't even know what you were doing really. So it's kind of a good way to get started. And in fact, from my very first workshop through UC Santa Cruz, one of my pictures was published in a hardback book later that year. So it's just a great way to learn. I studied with Art Wolf. I studied with Louis Kemper. I studied with, well, actually, I travel a lot with Daisy Girardini, which is one of the best wildlife photographers in the world. And I just have fun in the field. It's fun. You're learning, you're getting a product, and it's just a great way to learn and inexpensive. These aren't expensive workshops through the UC system. They're very inexpensive. Cal State system has them too. So that's basically what I did. And I did do the New York Institute of Photography too.
Cool. Well, what Tori and I did was we asked Barbara to select 4 or 5 pictures that were kind of special to her. And so we're going to show you those and she's going to talk about them. So ready or not, here we go.
That's me. Whales. I love whales. I spent the first many years of my photography career photographing whales. I photographed probably 20 species of whales. And in fact, my big break in photography was about just a year after I started. And the editor of Shutterbug magazine, which was a big photo magazine back in the day, she had just lost a friend who was a whale lover, and she went online looking to see if she could find some pictures of whales. This was way back in 1996, or 95. There weren't very many photographers on the web, but I was. And I had nothing but whale pictures up there. And the next thing I knew, I was the centerfold in Shutterbug magazine a year into my career. It was just like a miracle. And with all my whales. And so whales have always been important to me. And for years, I think my first trip to Alaska was in 1995 or 6. I went on a fish trawler with Ron Patterson, Delphinus, and we were in Southeast Alaska, and it was a private trip. Just Dawn and I were on that trip. And we saw a few bubble net feeding whales, but not very many. So for the next many years, I led workshops up in Alaska aboard Delphinus, always hoping to see the elusive bubble net feeding whales. And finally we saw a few, but not big masses. But 2 years ago, I led my last workshop aboard Delphinus because it's retired now. And every day in Southeast Alaska, we have pods of 11 and 12 humpback lunge feeding whales. So this picture you're seeing is, I think this is the pod of 11. And what they do, they blow a bubble net and surround the creel, which is what they're eating this day. And then they all come up in the air, grab their mouth full of water, and then they push the water out through their baleen, which traps all the krill, and that's how they feed. So this was a treat. We spent 2 days with 2 separate pods doing this over and over and over again. It's a photographer's dream. So, and it's very hard to see that kind of thing. So that's why this is so special to me. Whale photography started my career, and it's always been one of my favorite things to do is photograph whales.
Neat. Onward.
Onward. So this little cub was probably, I'd say, about maybe 2 feet tall. And I photographed this little cub at Pack Creek, which is on Admiralty Island. Pack Creek is a really special place. It's a state preserve, and they only allow 12 people at a time to go to the viewing area on Pack Creek. It's also a wilderness area, so there is nothing there. There's no shelter, there's no outhouse, there's no anything. And you come in by skip or a float plane, and you meet a ranger on this little spit. And the ranger then calls the other ranger who's over in the viewing area, which is only about 20 by 30. It's about a quarter of a mile away, and he calls to make sure, he or she, that there's no bears in between the 2 spots. And if there aren't, we walk over to the viewing area. This particular area has one of the largest populations of brown bears in the world. Admiralty Island does. And what's so fascinating about these bears on this island is that there used to be a man that lived there named Stan Price. He lived there for 40 years with these brown bears. He had a garden. He walked every day with them. If they got too close, he just tapped them on the nose with his walking stick. And in all those 40 years, he only had 1 bad encounter. And that was on the path going to where the viewing area is now. And so what happened with these bears, they got used to Stan not bothering them, and they didn't bother Stan. And I think Stan died in maybe 1989, and they turned this into a special wildlife preserve where 12 people a day can be on the viewing area. So it's by permit. And the same families are there year after year. This particular bear cub, whose sibling is not far away, I photographed this bear cub's mother, I believe 8 years earlier than this. So I was very excited to see her and her 2 cubs. Because when I first photographed the mother, they didn't think she was going to make it. She was an orphan 2nd-year cub, and they didn't make it. So here she was with her two cubs when we went. And because the rule here is the bears have the right of way. So if you're walking the quarter of a mile along the beach over to where the bear viewing area is, if a bear comes along that path, you have to step into the ocean and let them walk by. They have the right of way. And they know in the viewing area, you cannot leave the viewing area. You have to stay right there. And there's nothing but sand and two logs to sit on. And as I said, there's no bathrooms. So if you have to go to the bathroom, the ranger takes you off into the bushes somewhere. And it's just a really special, pristine place. And because the bears know you can't bother them, they might come up, like this is probably about 20 feet away. She brought her two cubs up past the viewing area, minding their own business. He just looked over to see what we were doing. So it's a very special place. I think Phil's been there. And I just love this because I got to see this sow's cub.
Cool, great story. Tori, next.
Oh, come on. 1 moment.
Probably the waterfall is.
Oh, hold on.
Nope.
I'm going to back up a little bit. There we go.
This is up on the Chilcot River, which is up at the end of the Lynn Canal. And it's actually on the mainland. When we get off of the boat there, it's the mainland, and you go maybe 50 miles and you're up in Canada. So every year on the Chilcot, it's one of the last rivers to freeze in Alaska. And every year in November, normally there's snow, and you see there's none here because this was a weird year. But eagles gather, sometimes 40,000 eagles will be on the Chilcot River because it's the last salmon run in Alaska. So I don't know, in the bottom of the picture, you'll see something lying on the sand. That's part of a salmon. And the eagle is upside down, that was that eagle's salmon. The eagle was standing there eating that salmon. And what happens then, and the eagle on top, the eagles will fly down and knock the other eagle off the salmon. And this very rarely happens. This eagle was really fast and managed to grab the talons of the eagle that was going to knock it over. And you can hear them hit. I mean, it's amazing that they don't just kill each other, because they'll swoop in. And the eagle can tell it's coming by hearing the screaming that the eagles are making. These other two eagles were screaming because there's an eagle coming in. So this is just rare that this eagle flipped in time to grab the talons. Now they both crashed, and the guy to the right walked over and took the salmon. So it's just fascinating to watch them though, but there's thousands of them. They're everywhere.
Wow.
And the bears were still out this year, so you have to watch for the brown bears.
Interesting. All right, next.
It's kind of lagging. 1 second. Come on. No, yet again. There we go. Okay.
This is a very special photograph to me. And it's very special to any photographer that captured it, because sometimes I've talked to photographers who have gone 7, 8, 9 years in a row trying to capture this without any luck. This was also my first photograph that was in National Geographic. So it's kind of special to me. But this is called Horsetail Falls. It's in Yosemite. And it is on El Capitan. And Horsetail Falls is so special because lots of things have to come together to make a photograph like this happen. The last 2 weeks in February, if there's water, if we're not in a drought, so if there's water flowing, and if that water isn't frozen at the top of the falls, and if it's not cloudy, and if it's not raining horribly, right at about 5:30, 5:29, the sunlight hits the water for about 2 minutes, and you can get this.
Wow.
And it's just, and the more water, the more glow you'll see. And it's just incredible. And the day when we were up there, it was snowing all day. And there was no water. until about 2 o'clock, and we made another pass. I was with Ellen Anon, another world famous photographer. And we drove around the valley, and I looked up and I said, I think there's water. Let's go back. So we did. And it was pouring down rain. It was, or snow and rain by that time. And we hiked up maybe about a half a mile to this view here and stood there freezing to death for about 20 minutes. And all the other photographers down below in the parking lot and all were leaving because it wasn't going to happen. And at about 5:25, the sky just opened up and the sunlight came through and we got these pictures.
Wow.
So patience is everything in photography. So yeah.
All right, final one, Tori, please.
Aha. So this one is special. This is taken on Hatchery Road off of Highway 38. It was taken in during a monsoon season. And one of the reasons this is pretty special to me, I'm always trying new things. Okay, I'm trying new things. So I set up my tripod, and these were thunderheads coming up from the desert. I'm looking east, standing on Hatchery Road. This is 150 photos taken 5 seconds apart and then stacked together in a star stacking program. And I love it because it gave the effect that the clouds were painting themselves. So you can do it anywhere where you've got a foreground that's not really moving. And I tried this all around Big Bear. I can't tell you how many times I shot 150 shots trying to get something to work. And this day it worked. It just worked fine. And I get very excited when I try new techniques. I like movement techniques. I like multiple exposure. And so I love this this summer storm picture. And besides that, it's in Big Bear.
Wow, it's beautiful. All right, I think it's the audience's turn. Tori, if we can see everybody, if you have a question, if you just wave at me, Tori will unmute you and Barbara would be happy to interact with you. Al Miner, go ahead.
Your picture of in Yosemite looked like the firefalls. Did you ever get a picture of the firefall?
No, I was young. I saw the firefalls, but no, they had stopped doing that before I ever started photographing, but it does look like a firefall.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Other questions from any of you or comments? Nancy, go ahead.
Yeah, Barbara, first of all, I love your photos, those and the stories behind them. It's so fascinating. The eagles, it's just unbelievable. And the little bear, oh my gosh, I never saw anything so cute. But I have a question about your mitigation expert life. It's interesting to me because it is in the penalty phase. You were working for the court rather than the defendant or the plaintiff, right?
No, the court appoints me to work with the defendant.
Oh, you are working for the defendant. Okay.
Yes. I've worked with several of the famous serial killers and that type of thing. I mean, yes, post-conviction and at trial.
Wow.
And even now, I'm writing motions for an attorney on a death penalty case. Now.
Oh.
I also write motions.
Barbara, Laura wanted to know if you have a website and have some of your pictures on your website. Do you have a website?
Yes, it's barbarajordan.com. That's an easy one.
Other questions? Sherry, go ahead.
It's Sue, but
Oh, I'm sorry, Sue.
Barbara's just my mentor. I so appreciate her, and I wanted to watch this so badly. Every time we're together, we either talk law or pictures, it seems
That's
like.
true.
But Barbara introduced me at a convention to Ellen Anon, who she did workshops with. And I've never, other than that one time, I've never met Ellen, but we've become friends on Facebook. And people like Barbara and Ellen, you ask a question, Ellen does some whole new technique. And I'll say, how'd you do that? and she sends me a note and tells me exactly how she did it. And a real photographer is so willing. Some of these big time folks like Barbara, you bet, are willing to spend time um, showing how. And Barb, I really miss seeing you. So we'll get together when this is over. But
We will.
she's a wonder and a real inspiration for a lot of people. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks,
you,
Sue.
Sue.
Others of you have questions for Barbara, either about her photography or her legal career? Paul, go ahead.
Oh,
Could you go more into detail about your experiences with National Geographic and everything that was with that?
Well, I didn't work on payroll with National Geographic. My photos that were in National Geo, I've got some others that were in there. National Geo purchased them from Getty Images, is who my agent was. So I have a lot of photos with Getty, and I'm very fortunate they picked mine. There's other photographers that have wonderful photos of Horsetail Falls, but they picked mine. So, and then I have a jumping mountain lion that was in National Geo, and I have a beluga whale on tail of an airplane up in Canada, one of their fleets, and I have the lynx on Frontier Airlines on the tail of their airplanes. That's always been pretty exciting to watch them fly.
Cool. Other questions from any of you? Sherry, are you waving your hand around or what? You want to unmute?
Or Scott. Scott was waving his.
There we go.
Scott, you had a question? Go ahead.
Yes, the stories about your photography are pretty interesting. Have you been in situations where you thought maybe this might be your last photo?
I had a big 1,000-pound brown bear come up and sniff me at Silver Salmon Creek in Alaska. I mean, that's probably the closest I've come to feeling that way. Even though the guide I was with said this bear does this a lot, just don't move. And that's what you do with bears, you don't move. I mean, they can run 35 miles an hour or so. And these are, people also don't realize these are much bigger than the subspecies grizzly. These are coastal brown bears. They're huge. And yeah, that's probably the first time I thought maybe this is it. And you try not to move, but your body wants to go. I mean, you want to move, And she came up and she was about maybe 2 feet away from me, sniffing me. That was very frightening. I mean, I love photographing whales and I love photographing all wildlife and bears and everything, but that doesn't mean I'm not well aware of the dangers when I'm out there. And when I leave workshops, anybody that's been on my workshops, if we go where there's bears, if we leave the boat or anything, you can't even have a candy wrapper in your pocket. You've got to follow all these rules because bears are they have incredibly good sense of smell. So I'm very careful and I study my animals before I photograph them.
Cool. Other questions from anyone? Paul, another one? Go ahead, and then we'll go to Sherry. Go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted a clarification. You said that Nat Geo was getting your pictures off of Getty Images. Does that mean that you were able to go on assignment, or was that just separate?
No, Getty lets you license images. I've had images sold to museums. My images go all over the world. So Getty is the agent. And like if National Geo wanted Horsetail Falls, so they signed on to Getty to see what pictures of Horsetail Falls they had. And then they bought it. And that's how that works. And so they could be anywhere. And it's interesting where things show up. And I had a lot of the whales show up with Swissair on their advertising for whale watching in the United States. So yeah, they can go anywhere from Getty.
Sherry, you had a comment?
I have a question. Are you painting right now?
No, I
You're not?
haven't done any painting.
Oh.
I'm using my alcohol for other things right now.
Well, okay, when we're out of lockdown, I want to come over and paint with you again. It's alcohol ink, and
Yes.
it's fun.
It's a lot of fun. It's very fluid. And as anyone who's seen some of my photography work, I do a lot of multiple exposure photography work too. So to me, that it's got a lot of movement in it. It looks kind of Monet-ish. So it was real easy to go into very fluid painting the alcohol ink. But no, I haven't been doing that. And I'm glad I didn't use up all my alcohol now.
Okay.
Al?
Susie.
Barbara, how are you paid? Through your agent or through the company or the whoever buys the picture?
The agent pays me, and the agent takes, now Getty's up to 80%.
Oh,
So I'd much rather I sell them not through my agent.
oh my gosh.
Like the beluga whale that's on the tail of airplanes. I've had a website for a long time. When AOL first started, I was so fascinated by the web. So my pictures have been up there for a long time. And a lot of universities linked to my whale photography because it was all new. There was a web and you didn't have access to this before. And First Air of Canada saw my beluga whale on one of the university sites up there, and they contacted me and said, we have to have that for the tail of our airplane fleet.
Oh,
And it was like, okay, you know. So that kind of sell is much more lucrative to me than going through Getty anymore. They used to just take 50% and now it's 80.
Wow. Susie, you had a question or a comment?
Barbara, thank you so much for this. I really enjoyed it. I teach art at the middle school. I teach 7th and 8th grade art, and we're doing long distance teaching right now, trying to come up with ideas on how to engage our young people. And I was just wondering if I could ask you to come and do something like this, show and talk about your photography. If we could do this, a Zoom, meeting, and perhaps we could do that in the next month or two for this final quarter of school at Big Bear Middle School.
Yeah, I'd enjoy doing that. I've
you.
done that for other schools before.
Oh, you
and I've
have?
done,
We'd love to
yeah.
have you.
I love talking to the kids.
Thank you.
All right, we're about out of time. Paul, one last question from you, please.
So you say you don't like to use any of the stock photography going through mostly your website these days, but did you ever go through going through like assignments with other magazines or contracted to do any stuff like that outside of just going on the tours that you took people on?
Most of the time, I mean, I've taught workshops for, well, about 18 years now, 17 years. And I've also have done assignments for newsletters and some magazines that are no longer in print. So a lot of that is just gone now. I mean, the world has changed with photography now. Most of the stock photographers just can't do stock photography anymore and survive. So most of them are leading workshops.
Cool. All right, Elena, absolute last one. Go ahead.
Well, maybe it's appropriate. And Barbara, what are you photographing these days?
Well, I haven't been traveling because I've been home with my husband, who a lot of you know is not in the best of health. But I'm about to start doing some Sue Cindy's from Ellen Anon. This woman, Ellen Anon, gets me started on doing weird things. And she's the one that got me started in doing photographing water and oil. But I'm going to be doing some photography with flowers on a light box and then reversing the polarity and this type of thing. And it's just some way interesting things to do. So mainly photography around here. Trying some new macro work. I go do macro work, which I was traveling so much I didn't spend much time doing macro, but I can do that at home. And I can do multiple exposure at home if our spring ever comes and we ever get spring flowers.
Barbara, it's been a delight. Thank you very much for your time today. Let me introduce you. It happens every Tuesday at 5:30. Next week, Frank Rush, who is the new city manager here in Big Bear Lake, will be our guest. And some of you don't live in the city, and that's fine. But Frank obviously is concerned about the entire valley. And I'm sure some of the things that he has to share will be of interest whether you live in the city or not. So I hope you'll spread the word. Next Tuesday, 5:30, same time, same place. Mr. Frank Rush will be joining us. Thank you all for coming today. Hope you found this interesting and enjoyable. Thanks, Barbara. Bye-bye.
Thank you.